Hello friends, welcome to Star Explainer. Tales of Herding Gods Part 341 and 342 explains based on novel. So let's start explanation. Qin Mu's body froze. The celestial emperor of the extraterritorial celestial heavens was the Heaven Alliance. Did the blind elder mean that someone in the Heaven Alliance was the celestial emperor, or was it the entire Heaven Alliance? He had never thought of this problem before. Could there be a possibility that the celestial emperor of the extraterritorial celestial heavens wasn't a person, but a group of people, and in this group of people, there were all kinds of disputes regarding interests? If this guess was established, he would be able to draw the outline of the High Emperor era. The High Emperor era was caused by Mother Earth. Mother Earth had groomed her own children and supported them to create the High Emperor era, and establish the High Emperor Celestial Heavens, making them be known as North High Emperor. On the other side, the Heaven Alliance supported another group of people to create South High Emperor and establish the South High Emperor Celestial Heavens, which went against North High Emperor. The fights between the two celestial heavens lasted for 300,000 years. At that time, the extraterritorial celestial heavens was just a bystander, sitting on the mountain and watching the tigers fight. At that time, the extraterritorial celestial heavens was still the Dragon Han celestial heavens. After the Dragon Han celestial heavens annexed the Heaven Han celestial heavens and the Dragon Heaven celestial heavens, it had become an oversized monster, and the ancient gods in this celestial heavens also had gods that were cultivated from half-gods and life forms after the beginning. Meanwhile, the Heaven Alliance became stronger and stronger, and they used various methods to gradually replace the pillars of the extraterritorial celestial heavens, taking the extraterritorial celestial heavens into their control. The ancient gods all felt themselves to be in danger. Heaven Duke, Earth Count, they felt their own benefits at stake, and they were also in danger of being replaced. The internal structure of the Heaven Alliance also started to crack due to the appearance of power and benefits. The Heaven Alliance that had controlled the extraterritorial celestial heavens also ended up having conflicting views that couldn't be mediated. The ideals of South High Emperor were that human lives were greater than heaven, that gods had to serve the people as well. On the other hand, after the Heaven Alliance in the extraterritorial celestial heavens gained control of incomparable power and authority, the South High Emperor celestial heavens had become a thorn in their eyes, becoming a colossus that had threatened their rule. The conflicting views erupted right after Mother Earth was wiped out by the Heaven Alliance. With Mother Earth's death, the North High Emperor celestial heavens was erased, and eradicating South High Emperor became the #1 mission for the Heaven Alliance. The battle had erupted right when Celestial Venerable Ling was intercepting the Celestial River to test out her divine art, which was at the most perfect state. If Celestial Venerable Ling didn't die, the South High Emperor Celestial Heavens wouldn't be defeated. That terrifying existence fought his way into the fog and assassinated Celestial Venerable Ling. At the same time, the gods of the extraterritorial celestial heavens attacked the South High Emperor Celestial Heavens, which resulted in the complete annihilation of the High Emperor Celestial Heavens. This was Qin Mu's guess. Even though there were still many questions left unanswered, he felt that this guess was more or less close to the truth. He followed the blind elder to the side of the celestial river again, and the blind elder continued to store the corpse of Celestial Venerable Ling that came floating down the river. The exact same situation happened, and the corpse of Celestial Venerable Ling turned into clear water again. Qin Mu couldn't resist saying, "Elder, Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art allows substances to not change, not increasing and not decreasing. Even if she's dead, her corpse will vanish and transform into her again, coming back to life. That is because her divine art is none other than unchanging substances. You will never collect her body, it will merely be the water in the river. The true her has already transformed into that lump of eternal substance on the celestial river. She has already become the fog on the river. She doesn't care what you are doing. She doesn't care that you are erecting a tombstone, or creating a tomb for her. If one was to choose someone that understood Celestial Venerable Ling, that person would definitely be Qin Mu. He understood Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art the most, and it was also him and founding emperor that had imparted the art of creation, which hadn't taken shape to Celestial Venerable Ling. Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art was still at the fledgling stage, and it was also completed under Qin Mu and founding emperor's guidance. After Qin Mu entered the ghost ship, it was also Qin Mu that had borrowed the power of the four deities to break apart Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. However, Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art back then was still not perfect. However, in regards to understanding Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art, he was indeed the number one person. In his eyes, the blind elder guarding by the riverside and collecting Celestial Venerable Ling's body was something that was completely unnecessary. That was because Celestial Venerable Ling had already fused with her divine art, and it could completely be said that Celestial Venerable Ling had already become her divine art. She would live eternally in her divine art, dying and reviving, reviving and dying, over and over again. Qin Mu even guessed that the fog he had met at the source of Surging River was Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. It was Celestial Venerable Ling that had brought him back to ancient times and brought him to the end of the High Emperor era. However, Qin Mu just didn't know at that time. The blind elder finished using all of the stone coffins and began dragging the coffins back to bury. He said with a muffled voice, "No one cares about her. Even she doesn't care about herself. Teacher only lives for the Tao. She is a pure person. She is so innocent that her heart only has the Tao. She doesn't have all those thoughts you guys have. She isn't crafty and scheming. She doesn't care about power and authority. She was no threat to everyone. So why did she have to die? Why couldn't she be left alive?" This blind elder was furious, and he raised his head to howl like an injured beast. Why did such a pure person have to die? Why could both of you, the two Celestial Venerables, not take the initiative to carry the responsibility? Why did you have to return back to the day you met her, and throw the heavy responsibility onto her? His hair rose up from his anger, and he roared sternly, "Couldn't both of you have carried the responsibility? Why did you have to leave? Couldn't you have walked down the path with her? Why did you let her face the dangers alone? She doesn't understand, Celestial Venerable Mu. She really doesn't understand." Two streaks of bloody tears rolled down his old face as he pulled the coffins forward. His voice gradually became softer and softer. "Why do I have to bury her? Why do I have to guard here over and over again to bury her? Celestial Venerable Mu, do you not understand? That is because she's dead. In her divine art, she has died time and time again. Do you not understand the pain of death? She has experienced countless deaths, so I have to bury her countless times. That is because every death is very painful, every death is real. She has to go through countless repetitions of such a death." Qin Mu was stunned, and he saw him off. Yang flew down from his shoulder and transformed into a beautiful girl. She took out her silk handkerchief to wipe the tears off his face. Qin Mu forced a smile and croaked, "I'm all right, thank you, big sister Yang." Violent clashes came from the Jade capital city, and Dragon King Tian suddenly laughed loudly. Disregarding everyone and rushing over, he jumped into the black coffin beside the dock with a loud bang and shouted, "Celestial Venerable Ling's treasures belongs to me now. There's hope for Mother Earth's resurrection now." This old dragon carried another coffin on his shoulder and happily sealed him and this coffin into the suspended coffin. Celestial Venerable Ling's treasures are right in this coffin. Dragon King Tian's laughter came from the inside of the coffin, and Qin Mu suddenly heard his laughter becoming miserable cries. The suspended coffin then vibrated violently, causing the surface of the celestial river to sway uncertainly, raising huge waves. Soon, fresh blood poured out from the suspended coffin, and the coffin gradually regained its calm. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched, and he looked at the suspended coffin floating above the river surface. The numinous sky hall of the Jade capital city was in a mess, and it had already been razed to the ground. The half-gods that Dragon King Tian had brought along were completely dead, and the maids that Yang Qiling and Mu Qiubai had brought along were also severely injured by Dragon King Tian. They were all collapsed on the ground. On the ruins of the numinous sky hall, several figures hurriedly flew over only to see the surface of the celestial river turning into a sea of blood. Red-colored blood gushed out of the suspended coffin, and dyed the river surface red. Everyone's hearts jumped, and suddenly, that suspended coffin opened up with a clack. There was a coffin inside the coffin, and the coffin that Dragon King Tian had carried into the suspended coffin suddenly stood upright inside. This coffin was already opened, and it was pitch black inside. What was even scarier was that gnawing sounds came from inside as though something was gnawing on something. Suddenly, blood burst out from this coffin like a flood, and the blood sprayed down in all directions. The celestial river that had already been dyed red became even redder. Thump! A huge dragon head flew out from that upright coffin, and smashed onto the river surface before slowly sinking down. That was Dragon King Tian's head. On the shore of the river, the corners of Xing'an's eyes twitched violently, and he lifted up his chest to slowly move backward. Celestial Venerable Yu, Yang Qiling, and Mu Qiubai also secretly moved back. In that battle earlier, because their abilities were far inferior to Dragon King Tian and the rest, they were disregarded by Dragon King Tian, and had survived instead. However, the coffin that they were fighting for had instead given them a bone-chilling cold now. Suddenly, claws that were covered in green hair stretched out of the coffin, and the claws under the green hair seemed to be cast in gold and copper. Everyone's faces changed drastically. At this very moment, a figure flew out from that coffin, and a tattered cape covered the entire sky above the celestial river. That was an incomparably strong emperor's corpse, that had already cultivated into a corpse demon in the coffin. Its mouth was laden with razor-sharp teeth, and Dragon King Tian's flesh was still hanging out from the side of its mouth. Overflowing corpse gas spread through this deathly silent celestial heavens. The corpse demon flew through the sky like light and lightning as he rushed straight at them. Yang Qiling shrieked, and those several maids beside them instantly rushed into the sky to face that emperor's corpse. These maids could clash head-on with Dragon King Tian, and even though they were severely injured, they had lived on. Their abilities were extremely brilliant, and yet they were caught by that emperor's corpse one after another to be stuffed into its mouth. Everyone hurriedly scattered and escaped. That corpse demon smiled oddly, and its scarlet red cape fluttered in the wind. It suddenly descended down from the sky, and its tattered cape covered a huge part of the palace. It grabbed a maid that was trying to escape. Screams came from the place where the cape had covered, and then the screams died down. The cape soared up once again, and covered the sky. That corpse demon searched around in the sky for any breath of living humans. Senior brother. The blind elder put down his hatchet and chisel before raising his head to shout loudly, "Senior brother. You're already dead, return back to where you should be." The corpse demon reanimated from High Emperor Celestial Emperor heard him, and immediately pounced at him. His arrogance was overflowing, and he was truly a High Emperor Celestial Emperor on Emperor's throne realm. The blind elder raised his hatchet in one hand and the chisel in another. With a loud bang, the huge hatchet smacked itself on the chisel. A beam of light burst out of the chisel, and flashed forward to nail into the heart of that corpse demon's brows. It was as if that corpse demon had suffered a heavy blow, and it flew back to land into the emperor's coffin on the surface of the celestial river. The coffin lid of the emperor's coffin closed. The blind elder put away his hatchet and chisel. He started swinging a chain, which became longer and longer, sweeping up that emperor's coffin. The blind elder swung the emperor's coffin, and gave it a jolt to send this coffin into the ruins of the numinous Sky Hall. When the emperor's coffin landed on the ground, countless bricks flew into the sky. The carved beams and painted rafters reconstructed themselves and transformed into a numinous Sky Hall that stood tall in the jade capital city that was filled with stone coffins and stone tombstones. Everyone who was currently escaping had just recovered from their shock, and they still felt a lingering fear. Qin Mu looked at the blind elder and was extremely astonished. This blind elder was nothing special to look at, yet his cultivation was immeasurable. He wasn't inferior to an existence on the Emperor's throne realm. Celestial Venerable Yu walked towards the blind elder, and his gaze wavered. You are Celestial Venerable Ling's disciple, Yi Shisheng. You are still alive, you have been keeping guard here all this time. The blind elder ignored him and continued to raise his hatchet and chisel. Celestial Venerable Yu smiled and said, You have the abilities. So why do you have to hole yourself up in such a desolate place? Celestial Venerable Ling cut off a section of the Celestial River and used herself to replace that section, transforming herself into the substance of the Celestial River. Her divine art is truly exquisite, and even I am full of admiration. You are her disciple, so you have definitely learned some of her divine art. The celestial heavens is in need of talents like you. The blind elder stopped his knocking and turned to look at him. He asked numbly, Which senior uncle of mine are you? Since you know my teacher has become the substance of the Celestial River, why did you have to come? Celestial Venerable Yu said with a smile, I'm just here to take a look at her, to see if she is really dead. Can you be at ease now? Asked the blind elder. Celestial Venerable Yu said, Naturally. The blind elder tightened his grip on his hatchet. He suddenly loosened his grip and said indifferently, Senior uncle, go away. Don't come and disturb our peace and quiet. Celestial Venerable Yu laughed loudly. The blind elder looked at Qin Mu and coldly said, Celestial Venerable Mu, go away too. Bring all of them away. You guys aren't needed here. Qin Mu let out a shaky breath, and he said solemnly, Don't worry. I will rescue Celestial Venerable Ling. I always keep my word. He turned around and walked towards the suspended coffin floating in the Celestial River. Behind him, knocking sounds rang out again, and he didn't know if the blind elder had heard him. Qin Mu returned to the suspended coffin, and Xing'an also walked in with the chest. He took a glance at Celestial Venerable Yu, Yang Qiling, and Mu Qiubai, who had jumped into the coffin as well. The blind elder didn't welcome anyone, so they could only leave. Suddenly, a blooded dragon head floated up from the water and jumped into the coffin. That was Dragon King Tian, and he was only left with a head after being gnawed by the corpse demon. Yet he actually hadn't died, and was hanging on to his last breath. Dragon King Tian stared at them ruthlessly, as he hid in a corner to gasp for breath. He kept a wary eye on everyone, and corpse gas was spreading out from his face. The corpse demon transformed from the Emperor's corpse had an extremely strong corpse poison, and it was currently invading his brain, tainting his primordial spirit. The suspended coffin closed with a clack. Outside the coffin, there was the sound of running water again. Previously, there were numerous people that had entered the suspended coffin, and only a few of them had survived. Numerous people had lost their lives on the way to solve the seals in Fallen God Valley. Some had even died from internal strife, and some were eaten up by the corpse demon. Yang Qiling originally had a lot of maids beside her, and now there was only one left. Furthermore, her injuries were rather severe. Yet this coffin was still full of dangers. Dragon King Tian was currently being assimilated by the corpse poison from the Emperor's corpse, and even though only his head was left, he was still panting heavily with corpse breath. Dragon King Tian, you are about to turn into a corpse. The Dragon Qiling couldn't resist saying and reminded him softly, cult master, is skilled in the art of healing. He might be able to help you get rid of the corpse poison. He, you want to kill me? Dragon King Tian's head was gasping heavily for breath. Currents of air went into his mouth and came out of his neck, causing green corpse gas to shroud around him. This divine dragon was abnormally wary, and he sneered. You can't kill me, so you are trying to poison me. Not that easy. He. The dragon Qin frowned and looked at Qin Mu. Qin Mu shook his head and said, I can't save him. Even I can't solve the corpse poison of an emperor's corpse. If it was Grandpa Apothecary, there might still be hope. The dragon Qin felt sorrowful. Dragon King Tian had graced him with his kindness and helped him complete his technique. He really wanted to save this divine dragon, but if Qin Mu was helpless, he naturally didn't have the means to. Dragon King Tian was still executing his magic power and tried to get rid of the corpse gas, but everyone in the coffin could clearly see his vital qi gradually turning milky. It was becoming a green-colored serous fluid. The divine art runes of his vital qi were also tainted by the corpse poison, and they were broken apart one by one. Xing'an felt a bone-chilling cold, and he carried his chest to leave the pavilion silently. He retreated into the darkness and vanished. The two big dragon's eyes of Dragon King Tian had already become white in color. His pupils had vanished, and yet he was still blinking as though he could see his surroundings. Yang Qiling and Mu Qiubai felt slight fear, and they also moved back secretly, vanishing into the darkness. Qin Mu signaled to the dragon Qilin, and the dragon Qilin hurriedly followed after him. Yang transformed into a green sparrow, and stood on the dragon Qilin's head as they walked towards the darkness without a sound. Celestial Venerable Yu had also left this place and had hidden somewhere. I see you guys. Corpse liquid flowed out of Dragon King Tian's mouth, and he continued to stare with eyes with no pupils. He cried out, I see you guys, don't think about harming me. Foo. I see you guys. He didn't have any breath left, and after a moment, this huge dragon head flew up silently. The head was shrouded in a green fog, and it gave off a peculiar voice while chuckling. I see you guys. He flew into the darkness and laughed. I see you guys. Where have you hidden my body? Once I catch and eat you, my body will be able to grow back, he. The space inside the suspended coffin was extremely vast. When they first fell into the suspended coffin, they had fallen for quite some time before they reached the bottom. Only now that Qin Mu was fumbling forward in the darkness did he realize that the space inside the suspended coffin was even bigger than his imagination. The suspended coffin was a tool of transportation, a tool to receive the Celestial Venerables to where Celestial Venerable Ling was buried. However, this suspended coffin was constructed by the Blind Elder. The Blind Elder's abilities were immeasurable, and he had distorted the space inside the suspended coffin into a vast space. Qin Mu walked in the darkness for a very long time, yet he still didn't reach the border. Fatty dragon. Qin Mu whispered. There were no sounds behind him. Qin Mu was astonished, and he hurriedly stopped. His heart moved, and his vital qi transformed into a ball of flame to shine in his surroundings. The dragon Qilin and Yang had actually disappeared into the darkness. This place was simply too dark. There was no light, so he didn't notice when the dragon Qilin had disappeared. Cold sweat broke out on Qin Mu's forehead, and he thought to himself, he has Yang on his head, fatty dragon will be fine. Right at this moment, Dragon King Tian's twisted and peculiar laughter rang out. I see you. Qin Mu hurriedly extinguished his flames and executed the phantom illusion technique, turning his body into a black shadow on the ground. Whoosh! Dragon King Tian's huge head was wobbling as it flew past him, and his eyes were shining with a lush green gleam. He flew to somewhere else. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief, and his shadow stood up. With a tremble, the shadow that had no thickness suddenly swelled up, and his body was restored. I see you. Dragon King Tian's weird laughter came from far away, and suddenly, there was a miserable scream. He didn't know who had suffered from the vicious attack. Qin Mu composed himself, and the big head of Dragon King Tian flew further and further away. Finally, his laughter couldn't be heard anymore. Silence filled the surroundings. Qin Mu took out his sword pellet, and his heart moved slightly. The sword pellet suddenly broke down and transformed into countless swords to fly silently around him, covering a radius of 300 yards. He continued to fumble slowly in the darkness, and the flying swords also moved together with his body. These flying swords traveled up and down, while the formations that they constructed also changed continuously. And at this moment, a figure walked out from the side of the pavilion and moved into the pavilion. Mu Qiubai looked around and let out a sigh. Dragon King Tian has turned into a corpse and is chasing after my maid, so he probably won't come back to this pavilion anytime soon. This is then the safest place. Who's there? He suddenly turned around and looked nervously into the darkness. In the darkness, indiscernible footsteps rang out, and a youth carrying a chest appeared in front of his eyes. Mu Qiubai let out a sigh of relief before smiling and saying leisurely, "So it's that expert beside Celestial Venerable Mu. You were actually hiding nearby as I did. You must have thought that the most dangerous place is the safest place. It looks like you have some intelligence as well. Your body is very good. I like it very much." Xing'an put down his chest and examined him with a fervent gaze, as though he was admiring a work of art. The chest opened up automatically with a clack, and Xing'an was still tilting his head and examining Mu Qiubai. His gaze became more and more fervent. Mu Qiubai was extremely uncomfortable from his stare, and he sneered. "You and I clashed at the Numinous Sky Hall before, and I have to admit that you are indeed very strong. However, you wouldn't expect me to be the disciple of ancient god Celestial Emperor. I have cultivated alongside His Majesty Celestial Emperor ever since I was young, and I know all of the great Tao in the world by heart. Challenging me is just seeking your death." Xing'an continued to observe him and nodded his head repeatedly while muttering, "Disciple of Celestial Emperor, no wonder your corporeal body is so good, your primordial spirit is also so strong. To deal with you, I need to use my trump card." Cult Master Qin always felt that I had gone down the wrong path by stealing other people's limbs for my immortality. I was shouted at and hunted everywhere I went, but they didn't understand me. There weren't many collections left in the chest since most of them had already been lost in Fallen God Valley, but at that moment, the terrifying aura spread out from the chest. Xing'an smiled slightly and said, "They thought I did it for immortality, but that was merely my dream when I couldn't become a god. Now I have an even higher dream." From the chest, a huge body gradually crawled out, and it was a behemoth formed by the arms, heads, and body parts of dozens of true gods. The behemoth crept there, and its head stared at Mu Qiubai excitedly. Xing'an stood on the body of this devil god and looked at Mu Qiubai before saying faintly, "I'm going to collect you." This behemoth soared into the sky and pounced at Mu Qiubai. Mu Qiubai's mind was in a daze. What Tao is this? Such a Tao was never recorded in Celestial Emperor's treasure vault. In the darkness, Qin Mu heard the fluctuation of the divine arts coming from the direction of the pavilion, and his heart stirred slightly. He immediately headed in the direction of the wave motions. Suddenly, he stopped in his footsteps. There were also divine arts bursting forth in front of him and shining brightly. Mother Earth's Tao 3. Yang Qiling's voice rang out. Great Sun Sovereign's Tao 1. Celestial Empress Tao 2. Heaven Tao's Tao 16. Who exactly are you? How can you control the rules of these great Tao? Beams of bright light tore through the darkness, and Qin Mu looked over to see Yang Qiling, and Celestial Venerable Yu. Yang Qiling's cultivation was extremely strong. When he and Yang Qiling fought, he was nearly beaten to death by her. Yang Qiling had learned from ancient God Celestial Emperor, and Dao ancestor, should have sorted out all the great Dao in the world, handing them to this ancient God Celestial Emperor. That was why Yang Qiling was familiar with all the great Dao. The most crucial point was still Yang Qiling receiving Celestial Emperor's true teachings, and cultivating the great divine art of Celestial Emperor's Dao One that had incomparably terrifying power. Yet the Celestial Venerable Yu in front of her was even more terrifying. Yang Qiling was only familiar with the divine arts from all kinds of great Dao, while Celestial Venerable Yu could freely use the divine arts from all the great Dao. Every one of them was exquisite, and every one of them had frightening power. It was as if the ancient god was executing them personally in the same realm. Yang Qiling fell into a disadvantage, and she suddenly gave a fierce roar to finally execute ancient God Celestial Emperor's great divine art of Dao One. At this moment, the rules of Dao burst forth as though Celestial Emperor had descended personally. The terrifying waves pounced right towards Celestial Venerable Yu. At the same time, Celestial Venerable Yu also executed a similar great divine art of Dao One. In Yang Qiling's fearful eyes, the two great divine arts of Dao One collided together. In an instant, the bright light burst out from the divine arts, illuminating a radius of several hundred miles. Yang Qiling coughed up blood and fell backward. Her body suddenly transformed into a black sparrow, with a white belly to flap away. Celestial Venerable Yu took 2 steps to pursue her, but he suddenly stopped to look over at Qin Mu. Qin Mu's gaze met his gaze, and it was as though 2 invisible fists had collided ruthlessly on each other in the air. This caused the air between both of them to stir and raise a gale. "I see you guys, he. In the air, a huge head was flying over rapidly. Qin Mu stretched out his hand as an invitation, and Celestial Venerable Yu gave a slight smile. Both of them walked forward. The light from the great divine art of Dao One faded, and both of them vanished into the darkness. However, they still continued to walk forward. The stench of the corpse rushed over, and the big head of Dragon King Tian flew over from the sky. He chuckled and said, "I see you." Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu continued to walk forward, and Celestial Venerable Yu placed his hands behind his back to walk into the darkness. Back then, in the Battle of Jade Pool, you shocked the world with your unmatched divine art. It was truly admirable. Thinking back on it now, your divine art can still be considered not bad. I've already met Celestial Venerable Qin. After he grew up, he could pressure the world with his techniques. However, it was a pity the time he had cultivated was too short. Qin Mu's footsteps were steady, and he said solemnly, "You are merely borrowing an imperfect body to come forward now. Your cultivation and abilities aren't strong at all. Killing you is not a problem for me." Celestial Venerable Yu laughed and said, "You thought the divine arts of the celestial heavens had always remained frozen and hadn't advanced. You are too naive. The divine arts in the celestial heavens have already advanced to a step that you cannot imagine. It's been 1,000,000 years, Celestial Venerable Mu. It has already been 1,000,000 years since you became a hero at the Jade Pool meeting. You have no idea how divine arts developed in this 1,000,000 years." He scorned. "You are still absorbed in your glory from 1,000,000 years ago. The frog at the bottom of the well is what describes you." Whoosh! A huge dragon head rushed in between them. Dragon King Tian was giving off lush green corpse gas. One of his eyeballs looked left, and the other looked right, while stinky corpse liquid flowed out from his mouth as he chuckled. "I see both of you." Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu burst forth, at the same time, and attacked each other across the huge head of the corpse dragon. Dragon King Tian's head was incomparably huge, and it was suspended in mid-air between the two of them. The Dragon King's head had already become a zombie, it was lush green, and even the strands of his dragon beard were now a green color, and covered in corpse liquid. The divine arts of Qin Mu and celestial venerable Yu exploded on either side of Dragon King Tian's head. Qin Mu raised his hand and grabbed a flying sword that was circling him, stabbing forward. The numerous flying swords that had been encircling him followed the movements of this sword and flew towards Dragon King Tian's head. Every single flying sword was tainted by corpse poison. When Qin Mu's flying sword reached the other side of Dragon King Tian's head, the group of green swords had transformed into a sword formation and engulfed Celestial Venerable Yu within. At this very same instant, Celestial Venerable Yu directly executed the divine arts of Heaven's path, the 49 heavenly Tao. He cultivated the 49 paths, transforming them into 49 different forms of divine arts. Xuanju's Heaven Duke had countless devil gods living on his body, and through observation and measurement day and night, the Heaven's Path divine arts had already been thoroughly studied by the celestial heavens. Heaven Duke's body had been constructed by the celestial heavens, and the Heaven's Path divine arts had also been derived. Qin Mu had only been able to deduce the great Tao of heavenly fire from the crystals of the prism of heavenly fire, yet the celestial heavens had already long been able to derive the other heavenly Taos. The only deficiency was that the heavenly Tao of the celestial heavens was constructed solely from macroscopic algebra, and it lacked a microscopic level of construction. The heavenly Tao divine arts of Celestial Venerable Yu had split into different forms. There was a heavenly web, a crystallized tower of divine fire, a celestial boat, a divine monument, a dome of heaven, a sun-like day, a moon-like night, and a celestial abyss. The various heavenly Tao divine arts suddenly gathered together, transforming into a single mudra. The intricate runes that formed the divine arts actually went straight through Dragon King Tian's head, as if there was no obstacle in front of them, and aimed straight at Qin Mu. The divine arts of the two didn't meet, instead, they had aimed to attack the true body of their opponent at the first chance, aiming to finish off the opponent in the first strike. Dragon King Tian's head was still between the two of them, and though he was now muddle-headed after the reanimation, his level of cultivation still remained. If he had made a move on them, neither would be able to fend it off. So it was the best strategy to finish off the opponent first in order to be able to retreat safely. The heavenly Tao Mudra was as though Heaven Duke had made a personal appearance. It gave off an aura of magnificence and unparalleled heavenly might. On the other side of Dragon King Tian's head, Qin Mu faced the great heavenly Tao divine arts head-on. He tore the willow leaf off the heart of his brows, opening his third eye. Its gaze was as deep as the abyss. Where I am, it's Yudu. The savage devil chi of Yudu surged forth, and in that instant, Qin Mu felt as though he was sinking amidst the darkness of Yudu. Blazing flames raged on top of Qin Mu's head. It was the devil horns formed by the yellow springs. He was like Earth Count emerging from Yudu, raising the great Tao of Yudu. The rules of the great Tao of Yudu transformed into countless chains that coiled around his body. With the chains around him, Qin Mu stretched his hands and took on the mudra of the heavenly Tao. On the other side, the power of sword formations burst out. Countless flying swords leaped around with peculiar frequency, and every technique executed was the second form of Calamity Sword, raising calamity. Furthermore, the flying swords vanished and reappeared unpredictably, grouping into different formations. Qin Mu's sword Tao had two parts, opening calamity and raising calamity, and his comprehension of sword Tao principles contained within differed vastly. Initially, the opening calamity sword and raising calamity sword were very easy, the principles within were very complex, but the sword moves were incredibly simple. Now, the raising calamity sword form executed by any of the flying swords remained simple, yet when the raising calamity sword move was grouped together with it, it became an incredibly complicated sword formation. It wasn't just that. Every sword formation that emerged after every sword movement differed from the others. This was the result of Qin Mu's study of eternal peace's reforms under the guidance of Blind. The reforms of eternal peace had attained many achievements on the path of formations, and this was built on the foundations of the formation skill attainments of the founding emperor era. Blind epitomized the success of eternal peace's formation skills. He led the reforms of eternal peace's path of formations, gathering the righteous and using it to improve the people's welfare. On the contrary, Qin Mu used the path of formations on his own moves and divine arts, adding transformations to the formation of the Raising Calamity Sword. Caught in the ever-changing Raising Calamity Sword formation, the aura of Celestial Venerable Yu changed suddenly. A divine bridge stretched across the sky behind him, and his primordial spirit towered at the end of the divine bridge, standing before the southern heavenly gates. Behind him, layers of heavenly palaces emerged, forming a boundless celestial heavens. Brilliant golden rays permeated the skies. Of the 36 heavens and 72 halls of the celestial heavens, the highest hall was the numinous sky hall. There were layers of light radiating from it, with numerous phenomena spinning around it. They transformed into a display of an indomitable ancient celestial emperor sitting in a lotus position. The supreme of 10,000 paths, the convergence of 10,000 paths into one. Celestial Venerable Yu raised his hand, his mudra meeting with Qin Mu's Raising Calamity Sword formation. The sword formation was bursting with power, yet when confronted with his divine art, the sword formation became stuck, with countless flying swords coming to a still. The sword formation was instantly thrown into chaos. The divine arts of Celestial Venerable Yu burst out, breaking and shattering numerous flying swords from the sword formation. After breaking through the formation, Celestial Venerable Yu leaped into the air, only to see Dragon King Tian's lush green dragon beard curling in his direction, and flying past him by a narrow margin. On the other side, Qin Mu had managed to shatter his great heavenly Tao divine art. Immediately turning on his side, Qin Mu flattened his body, standing there like a black line, merging with the darkness. Dragon King Tian's thick dragon beard passed by without touching him. The eyeballs of the Dragon King's huge head rolled about, stopping before this black line yet still unable to see where Qin Mu was. Qin Mu had learned this move from Pan Gong Tso. On the path of escaping and disguise, Pan Gong Tso was peerless in his skills. Oh yes, you are still the son of Yudu. On top of Dragon King Tian's head, Celestial Venerable Yu had quickly dashed over, laughing. Using the great Tao of Yudu to combat the heavenly Tao is child's play to you. Dragon King Tian's beard stopped pursuing Qin Mu, piercing towards the Celestial Venerable Yu atop his head instead. Celestial Venerable Yu moved like a phantom, avoiding the attacks of the dragon beard. The dragon beard was able to interchange between being soft and hard, and it managed to pierce through the dragon scales, revealing the rotting flesh beneath the scales. At the same moment, the scattered flying sword came whooshing over, and a single palm reached out from the black line, striking hard on the sword. The corpse poison flew off the sword's surface, revealing the gleaming true body of the flying sword. The clattering noise continued, the flying sword reformed into the sword pellet, and Qin Mu grabbed it in his hand. Dragon King Tian's head charged towards him, mouth opened wide. Fish-smelling corpse air spewed out, and he went to swallow Qin Mu in one bit. However, in the split second that Qin Mu entered his mouth, teleportation runes broke out. When Dragon King Tian closed his mouth, the teleportation light appeared, and Qin Mu had vanished. In the next moment, a bright light suddenly appeared behind Celestial Venerable Yu, who was still running atop Dragon King Tian's head, and Qin Mu stabbed towards the back of his heart. The body of Celestial Venerable Yu transformed quickly. He had the head of a bird and the body of a human, and a huge sun halo appeared behind his head. The huge sun descended, and Qin Mu's sword stabbed into the sun's glow. The divine sword was instantly scorched red hot, and metal liquid dripped off of it. Qin Mu exerted strength in both legs, and stabbed straight forward with his sword. At this, Celestial Venerable Yu sprinted forward strenuously. The both of them were running across the Dragon King's reanimated head, and every step was incomparably heavy for them. Qin Mu's body shook, and 2 heads and 4 arms rapidly grew out. His palms were ever-changing, finally transforming into sword fingers, as each touched the heart of his brows. The first form of Calamity Sword, Opening Calamity. He pointed out his sword fingers, and 3 of them touched the divine sword. The power of the divine sword immediately burst out. Celestial Venerable Yu grunted, as the sun halo had been penetrated. He suddenly transformed his body again, this time taking the form of a goddess. His back was initially facing Qin Mu, but the instant he transformed into the goddess, his head, body, and limbs actually transformed backwards, and he was now facing Qin Mu head-on in this strange form. Her hands grabbed the divine sword that had pierced into his chest, and the space between both hands turned into a bottomless abyss. The abyss of the ruins of End. It was a huge vortex that revolved wildly in the darkness, its depths beyond measure. Qin Mu's opening Calamity Sword was sucked into the abyss with a screech, and with it, Qin Mu was swallowed as well. Qin Mu was devoured by Celestial Venerable Yu's ruins of End divine art. Countless runes revolved around him, and again he executed the teleportation divine art to escape. Celestial Venerable Yu pushed his hand to the sky, and numerous bits of starlight in the sky exploded. Countless stars gathered into a galaxy, transforming into an inescapable net. Qin Mu's figure had just emerged from the teleportation light, and he was immediately caught by the inescapable net, unable to break free at that moment. Qin Mu tried to use the teleportation divine art again, but suddenly, there were lightning flashes and rolling thunder, and he was caught in the net again. He continuously tried to dodge it, but he was repeatedly trapped. Celestial Venerable Yu flipped his hands around, and the net grew tighter and tighter. The countless bits of starlight gathered into a tight bunch, and Qin Mu flashed brightly in the inescapable net as the space inside it grew smaller and smaller. Who can master all of the great Tao divine arts of the ancient gods? Celestial Venerable Yu suddenly transformed into Wood Wolf of Kuei Star Sovereign. He now had the head of a wolf on the body of a human. Leaping into the sky and avoiding the attacks of Dragon King Tian's beard, he dashed towards Qin Mu, laughing. Only me, only this corporeal body. Moon howling serious. He let out a resonating screech, and the light in his mouth transformed into a current and smashed towards Qin Mu. The divine sword in Qin Mu's hands suddenly transformed into a golden brush. He swept the golden brush, drawing a door in the net and escaping through it. The moon howling serious divine art poured into the door and vanished without a trace. Celestial Venerable Yu was astonished. He flew quickly into the door and laughed. The great Tao divine art of the lower bound is truly getting more and more interesting. Just as he entered the door, the dragon beard of Dragon King Tian's also pierced through it. Following this, the dragon beard gripped onto both sides of the door, and Dragon King Tian's head attempted to squeeze through as he giggled. I see the both of you. Celestial Venerable Yu leaped up and transformed into a vermilion bird. Spreading his wings out over 100 yards, he flapped them and flew off, avoiding Dragon King Tian's attacks. Ahead, Qin Mu gripped the golden brush, sweeping it, a heavenly palace emerged. Qin Mu sprinted as though he was flying through the heavenly palace. He was twisting and turning the brush while dashing forward, and layers of space ceaselessly emerged ahead of him with the strokes of his brush. Following this, a celestial river flowed out of his brush. A great flood descended from the skies, surging forward and heading straight towards the vermilion bird that Celestial Venerable Yu had transformed into. The vermilion bird was flying too quickly and was unable to dodge it. Celestial Venerable Yu spun his body around suddenly. Just as the celestial river rushed in front of him, he transformed into a black tortoise. The black tortoise roared and stepped into the river. A flying serpent coiled around his body, and he flapped his wings, now speeding up even more. Behind Celestial Venerable Yu, the reanimated head of Dragon King Tian was hit by the celestial river, and his face was drenched in water. Furious, Dragon King Tian opened his huge mouth and sucked with all his might. The celestial river flowed out from his neck. Dragon King Tian kept his mouth wide open and rushed forward along the river. Celestial Venerable Yu was about to catch up with Qin Mu, only to see him draw a celestial shuttle and leap into it. The two ends of the celestial shuttle were pointed, and it flew up with a whistling sound. Within the celestial shuttle, Qin Mu gripped the brush and drew with swift strokes, and an incomparably huge god appeared under his brush strokes. It was Celestial Emperor. When Qin Mu drew on the eyes of Celestial Emperor, he peeled open the eyes and dashed in on his celestial shuttle. Celestial Venerable Yu tried to rush in after him only to find himself banging into the eyes of Celestial Emperor. "Where is everybody?" Celestial Venerable Yu was startled. Behind him, the huge head of Dragon King Tian was rushing towards him. Qin Mu's figure appeared within the coffin, and he leaped off the celestial shuttle and turned around. Behind him was a picture of the celestial palace, erected upright in the darkness, with a faint flickering glow. Qin Mu shook the brush in his hand. The brush transformed into a sword pellet, and then into a sea of swords, spreading out all around the celestial palace picture. With a flash of his body, Qin Mu transformed into the form of the son of Yudu, permeating darkness. He stretched out a palm and gripped the celestial palace picture, shaking it hard. The space within the picture was immediately destroyed. At the same time that the picture was destroyed, the power of the sword formation burst forth, and the roars of Dragon King Tian and Celestial Venerable Yu could be heard from the middle of the sword formation. The sword lights poured forth like a huge wave and flooded them, but the two of them faded in and out amidst the sword lights. They were about to break through the formation. Suddenly, Dragon King Tian's reanimated head burst out of the sword formation and rolled off in an unknown direction. Celestial Venerable Yu followed closely, bursting out of the sword formation behind him. Just as he broke out of the sword formation, he froze upon sensing the murderous intent from behind. He immediately turned around, only to see the celestial river gushing behind Qin Mu, the celestial palace now faintly discernible. Qin Mu's primordial spirit stood on the celestial river, a treasure sword in his hand. He stepped on the celestial river and flew downwards from the sky, striking forward with his sword. When Celestial Venerable Yu saw the flash of his sword, it had already reached the space between his eyebrows. By the time he saw it completely, Qin Mu's primordial spirit had already pierced through his head with the sword, appearing behind him. Celestial Venerable Yu shook his head left and right, watching as something white in color flew out from between his brows. He raised his hand to touch his forehead, and his hand was covered in white brain plasma and red blood stains. The stab was truly so fast that I was caught off guard. He stuck out a finger to prod between his brows, his finger going through his head. Touching the back of his head, it was the same situation. Qin Mu descended to the ground, walking 2 steps forward. Behind him, the vast celestial river was gradually retreating as it swayed behind his back. Above the celestial river, the celestial palace could be seen faintly. Within the celestial palace, god voices burst out, and it sounded as though there were countless gods and devils chanting inside. Following the wane of Qin Mu's aura, only then did the chanting sounds gradually lower in volume and slowly disappear. Qin Mu's primordial spirit returned with his sword, standing outside the southern heavenly gates of the celestial palace, and above the celestial river, observing to see if Celestial Venerable Yu was making any other movements. Celestial Venerable Yu moved his head again, and felt his head getting heavier and dizzier. He laughed. This body is really not perfect. There are still many places that need improving. The speed of advancement of the divine arts of the lower bound has surpassed my expectations. Qin Mu shook his head. You merely used the true body power of this corporeal body, and didn't use your own power. Within this corporeal body hides the rules of the great Tao of almost all the ancient gods, but it lacks anything belonging to you. Are you trying to hide your true identity, or is your power unable to break through the world barrier? Regardless, without something of your own, you are destined to die in my hands. What Qin Mu said was a basic principle. In breaking through the world's barrier, the higher your cultivation, the greater the barrier. Thus, those who came down from the celestial heavens to the lower bound were usually divine arts practitioners. There were few devils and gods. Only when one was so powerful that the world barrier collapsed could they pass through the two worlds. Such a situation tended to only occur during the time of big-scale battles between gods and devils. For example, during the destruction of the founding emperor era and the high emperor era, the world barrier didn't exist. Beyond this, there were a few other situations that could break through the restrictions of the world barrier. For example, the spirit energy mutual shift bridge that Qin Mu designed and created with Black Tiger God, the phoenix ship of red deity Qi Xiaoyu, and Brahma Buddha's technique of entering dreams. These could all go around the world barrier. Perhaps there existed other secret routes that Qin Mu simply didn't know about. Following this principle, the powerful individuals who came down from the celestial heavens tended to be divine arts practitioners like Qi Jiui and Prince Qiuming. After coming down to Yuanju, they searched for the powerful individuals left there by the celestial heavens and made them their own followers. There were also the emissaries from Clear Sky Heaven, Xiao Chunfeng, Yu Hongxiu, and the disciples of the gods. They were all divine arts practitioners, who had received orders to come to the lower bounds to perfect the sky map. Clear Sky Heaven was one of the subordinate heavens under the Tao sect in the celestial heavens, so they had no need to seek the protection of gods and devils. Clear Sky Heaven could instead be the one providing them protection. However, they hadn't expected Qin Mu and Tao Master Lin Xian to come to Clear Sky Heaven. The Battle of Tao Sanctuary had almost wiped them out. Back in the day, Lu Yinxiu and the others had borrowed red deity Qi Xiaoyu's phoenix ship to come to the lower bound and thus avoided getting rejected by the world barrier. At the same time, due to Mingju and Yudu sharing similar characteristics, they were able to make use of the Mingju Heavenly Gate to travel back and forth to Mingju. Celestial Venerable Yu would have to obey this principle as well in order to come to the lower bound. Celestial Venerable Yu's realm had to be restricted to the level of that of a divine arts practitioner. At most, he could cultivate to the peak of the divine bridge realm, as if he contained any more power, he wouldn't be able to penetrate the world barrier of Yuanju. Another possibility was that one of the celestial venerables from the celestial heavens had forcefully broken open the world barrier. However, the unrest it would cause would be unimaginable. Qin Mu was confident that he would be able to kill Celestial Venerable Yu based on this logic. He had incomparably strong confidence and faith that a being who could defeat the overlord body in the same realm didn't exist in this world, even if that being was the Celestial Venerable Yu that had been created by the celestial heavens to contain all the rules of the great Tao of ancient gods. Celestial Venerable Yu's brain plasma was still spilling out, his brain already shattered by Qin Mu's strike. The divine treasure system within his body had also been destroyed. Qin Mu's primordial spirit controlled his sword, directing it to soar through the sky. It had already killed his corporeal body, and shattered the primordial spirit within it. That's not a divine bridge behind you. Why is your seventh divine treasure a celestial river? Celestial Venerable Yu was confused. The brain plasma in his head had almost all drained, yet he still sized Qin Mu up and looked towards the celestial river divine treasure behind him. Celestial Venerable Yu had many great Tao within his body, but they were pre-celestial great Tao, the great Tao of ancient gods. He didn't possess the great Tao of creation. He was unable to make use of the great Tao of creation, like Qin Mu did to repair the damage to his body, and thus he could only let his brain plasma run dry. You created a whole new divine treasure. With this divine treasure, you will be able to connect the celestial palace with the other divine treasures, forming a complete system. Celestial Venerable Yu moved his head again, his skull was empty now. However, he was still able to speak and think. Celestial Venerable Mu is no doubt Celestial Venerable Mu. Being able to come to this step, you are truly worthy of standing shoulder to shoulder with the 7 Celestial Venerables. What a joke that the others in the Celestial Palace are still vying for fame and gain, vying for power, and ignoring the changes in the lower bound. Heh, it would be far more convenient if the Celestial Emperor wasn't a group of people. Qin Mu looked straight into his eyes and spoke solemnly. Upon seeing my 7th divine treasure, do you have any thoughts about it, Celestial Venerable Yun? Celestial Venerable Yu gave a slight smile and replied with a leisurely tone. So it seems you thought that I was him and thus didn't mind revealing your celestial river, hoping that you could use this 7th divine treasure to make Celestial Venerable Yun give himself away. After all, Celestial Venerable Yun was the one who opened up the divine bridge divine treasure. So if he saw your 7th divine treasure, he would likely lose his composure since the 7th divine treasure you opened up is even better and more ingenious than his divine bridge divine treasure. However, you guessed wrongly, I'm not him. Tao flames suddenly engulfed him, and Celestial Venerable Yu smiled. Celestial Venerable Mu, you are still too naive, revealing your cards so early on. This corporeal body is merely one of my experiments. I simply wanted to test out Celestial Venerable Yu's fighting power. I have now realized that this body still has many imperfections. I know your cards now, yet you will never get this body nor know the secrets that lie within. The next time you see a Celestial Venerable Yu will be the day you die. Suddenly, the Tao flames on his body extinguished. Celestial Venerable Yu was shocked. He tried again to use the Tao flames to incinerate this corporeal body, yet the Tao flames were still not able to burn him. Your body, I'm collecting it. Behind Celestial Venerable Yu came a voice, and he turned around to look, only to see Xing'an emerging from the dark. Xing'an was carrying a chest with one hand, and his other hand was raised with his fingers stretched open, using an unknown technique to suppress his Tao flames. Xing'an had a fervent gaze as he put down the chest. Legs grew out of the chest, and it opened with a pop. It seemed very excited. Xing'an's gaze didn't land on Celestial Venerable Yu, instead he looked at Qin Mu, staying on the defensive against Qin Mu. Qin Mu spoke calmly, Xing'an, the consciousness hidden within this corporeal body, its origin is powerful beyond your imagination. Collecting this corporeal body, do you not fear death? From within the chest, multiple arms reached out and grabbed onto the sides of the chest, followed an enormous thing crawling out. Riding on top of this devil god with multiple limbs and heads was Mu Qiubai. Mu Qiubai was actually caught by Xing'an and turned into a puppet. Xing'an narrowed his eyes and replied, is it a Celestial Venerable? Even a Celestial Venerable admires this corporeal body, which means it must truly be wondrous beyond imagination. I definitely need to have it now. Not just the body alone. I want the consciousness of this Celestial Venerable as well. Xing'an moved his fingertips slightly, and numerous thin flying needles suddenly stabbed into different parts of Celestial Venerable Yu's body. Celestial Venerable Yu's expression changed greatly, yet he couldn't move an inch. His strand of consciousness had been sealed within this corporeal body, and he was unable to retrieve it. When did the juniors of the lower bound become so arrogant and impudent? He couldn't help but be furious. It would have been all right to have this corporeal body and primordial spirit destroyed by Qin Mu. After all, Qin Mu was Celestial Venerable Mu, one of the 9 Celestial Venerables back in those days. But who did this chest-carrying youth think he was? How dare he attempt to get hold of his strand of consciousness alongside the body? I still want to collect a real Celestial Venerable. Xing'an squinted, watching Qin Mu like a poisonous snake in human form. A true celestial venerable has a more beautiful and marvelous corporeal body. Qin Mu smiled slightly. Xing'an, get lost now that you have gained some benefits, otherwise, I don't mind eliminating you altogether. Xing'an gave a humph. He silently opened up his fingers, and fine rays moved about and circled the gaps between the fingers. He spoke softly, fighting him, you must have some injuries as well. I observed his divine arts, they were incomparably powerful. You merely used the path of painting divine arts and the like to throw him off balance. His level of cultivation even surpasses yours. Qin Mu stayed silent. With a humming sound, the gate of heaven influence appeared behind him. The corners of Xing'an's eyes twitched, and he hesitated for a moment. I'm back. Behind him came Dragon King Tian's weird laughter. I can see all of you. Eating you all will allow me to grow my body back. Xing'an's expression changed slightly, and the chest immediately came forward and swallowed Celestial Venerable Yu. The multi-limbed and multi-headed devil god with Mu Qiubai on its back also retreated quietly, all the way back into the chest. It raised an arm to catch hold of the chest lid, slamming it shut. Xing'an lifted the chest and disappeared into the darkness. Qin Mu sighed in relief. Suddenly, with a puff, he spat out a stream of blood fog. I smell the scent of fresh blood. The gigantic green head of Dragon King Tian flew over from the dark, opening its bloody mouth to bite Qin Mu. Qin Mu fell backwards, transforming into a black shadow, and pressing himself flat against the ground. However, Dragon King Tian didn't fly off, and instead, two green eyes suddenly shone directly at the shadow that Qin Mu had transformed into. This reanimated dragon, why is he smarter now? Qin Mu's expression changed drastically. With a loud bang, the black shadow exploded and transformed into a wisp of black smoke and flew off. Dragon King Tian chased after it, opening his mouth and sucking in with all his might. The black smoke was almost entirely sucked into his mouth. At that moment, the black smoke shifted, transforming into a lotus flower. In the middle of it sat Qin Mu. The petals started to fold in, wrapping Qin Mu up in layers and layers of petals. Dragon King Tian swallowed it up in one mouthful. At the far end of the dark, a lotus flower emerged and bloomed without a sound. Qin Mu sat in the center of the flower and quickly got up. He pushed down the blood that had surged to his throat and ran off hurriedly, thinking, Grandmaster, thanks a lot. I will definitely not beat you to death next time. Dragon King Tian ate the flower, and thinking he had eaten Qin Mu, he was delighted. He then moved on, looking for other prey. Not long after, Qin Mu spotted a red light in the dark. His heart shuddered slightly as he approached it silently. Then, he saw that it was a girl carrying a red lantern looking around vigilantly. Sister Yang. Qin Mu sighed in relief and hurried forward. Upon seeing him, Yang exclaimed, Young master, have you seen Fatty Dragon? I have lost him. Qin Mu speedily executed the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to repair the damage done to his body. Celestial Venerable Yu's inescapable net divine art had beaten him quite miserably. Fatty Dragon most likely fell asleep, you don't need to look for him. When the coffin returns to Fallen God Valley, it will open up, and at that time, you will see where he is. Xing'an, are you still not leaving? He turned around suddenly. In the darkness, two eyes emerged. Xing'an quietly retreated with the chest in his hand. Part 341 and 342 end here. Thank you for watching.